Hello, Society Laura Giles. Do you have questions about the other world? I know you do. And our guest today, Robert Ginsberg, has answers. Some of you may know Robert. He appears on Netflix's brand new Surviving Death series. He has his own podcast, Signs of Life Radio, and has written a book on mediumship. So tons of stuff. And I'll let him tell you all about the amazing things he's into. But first, let's pause to acknowledge our ancestors and elements. So I acknowledge the element of earth and thank you for the lovely earth, the firm foundation upon which we live, and the abundant food that surrounds us every day. Thank you for the amazing sensuous things that make our lives joyful and meaningful. I acknowledge the element of air and thank you for carrying our prayers to our ancestors and helping spirits, for bringing us their messages through intuitions and dreams. And I acknowledge the element of fire that helps us to do things and follow through and live our passion. I acknowledge the element of water and thank you for helping us to flow with the rhythm of life. I give thanks to the water for life-giving properties that it brings to all creatures. I acknowledge our loving, helping ancestors from the human, animal, and plant and mineral kingdoms who are always looking out for us, and I send you love and gratitude for all that you do every day that is seen and unseen. And thank you to all of our listeners for being here, sharing our podcast, asking questions, and commenting. I've recently started asking you to review us on iTunes, and all of this is helping our Google rating. So thank you, thank you, thank you. If you'd like to help with a financial donation, you can do that on our website at pansociety.net. So thank you all so much. And without further ado, let's welcome Robert Ginsberg. How are you?
Okay, pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you so much. So we're going to be talking about your mediumship and near-death experiences and all that good stuff today. I shared a little bit about your background, and can you flesh that out a little bit more and tell us how you got started in this realm and how that led to your TV show?
Well, it's a long journey. Years ago, I was leading a very materialistic life. I had the toys and the big house and all that stuff, and life was moving along. Then one evening, well, actually it was 3:00 in the morning. My wife, Phran, popped up, trembling and shaking. And she said, something horrible is going to happen today. And I said, well, what does that mean? And she said, I can't tell you exactly, but I know something devastating is going to happen today. And I, even though I didn't believe in anything non-physical, we were together for many years, and Phran, my wife, would have some occasional precognitive experiences, and visions and so forth. And every time she had one of these, they came true exactly the way she envisioned them. They were all good things, but logic told me that if she was right then, she could be right now. So I did what most parents would do. I kept tabs on my 3 children throughout the day. One was already in college. The other one was getting ready to go the next day. And my youngest one was working a part-time job. And then I sort of let my guard down at night and it faded from my awareness. And we were all out to dinner in 2 cars. And to make a long story short, my son and my daughter were involved in they took 1 car home. They were involved in a horrible accident. And my daughter didn't survive, and my son had some very serious brain injuries. And then about a month later, after it became clear that my son was indeed gonna survive, it hit me like a ton of bricks, because I remembered the day of the accident, and I remembered my wife's, knowing that that something bad was going to happen. That started me on a journey of finding out if there was any credible evidence that we're more than our physical bodies, that we can survive physical death. And I kind of crisscrossed the country. I met with medical doctors and scientists and researchers that studied consciousness. I needed the science end of it, and my wife, who had a much more spiritual outlook on things, didn't necessarily need the science. She just knew, but I did. And one thing led to another, and eventually we formed this not-for-profit foundation, Forever Family Foundation, which is a a merging of science and spirituality. And what you find is that sometimes they're not as different as you may think. One supports the other. And what we do is we're interested in all evidence that we're more than our physical bodies, and that could be in the form of telepathy or psychokinesis, or it could be mediumship, it could be after-death communications, or near-death experiences, end-of-life experiences, and all sorts of things, that show that who we are is not necessarily what's contained in our skulls. We're more than that. So over the years, people have a hunger for this kind of knowledge, and they're interested in it. And, we became a global organization. We have well over 10,000 members in 65 countries. And when we do things, as you mentioned, mediumship, which is the topic of my new book, is one of the types of evidence, that we do survive, but, there's a lot others. So that was a long-winded answer for a short question, but I came to this really the way a lot of people come to it is out of trauma or loss, that trauma or loss can be a trigger for exploration.
So do you do mediumship then?
No, I'm not. Okay. I'm not intuitive at all. Although I do believe that we all are intuitive to some degree, some more than others. I would receive, after my daughter's passing, probably over the course of the next 7 years or so, I received 70 dream visits from her.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm useless when I'm awake, but when I'm in that REM stage of sleep, somehow there's a conduit, which she could get through. And, dream visitations are different from so-called normal dreams. Normal dreams tend to be disjointed and kind of fragmented and all over the place. In a dream visitation, the entity in spirit that's coming through appears to you like they're in front of you. You could see them, you could touch them, you could talk to them, you could smell them and kiss them and so forth. So they're quite different, and they stay with you forever. I encourage people, if they're lucky enough to ever get one, to journal it and write it down so they can refer to it, later on.
For sure. So is it possible to ask for one?
Yeah, most people that are successful at it set their intention. They might say a prayer or some sort of words of encouragement or intention. They put it out there and they invite their loved ones in spirit to come through. That happens as well in mediumship. You set their intention. There's such a thing called electronic voice phenomena, where people set their intentions for that. So I think intention is important in no matter what you do, because we're entities of thought and energy, and what we put out there, it gets put out there in a universe that's connected. So people, it sounds strange to some people, that concept, but to some degree, we all come from that same spark of light, and we are connected. And science is starting to show that. You take a scientists that study quantum fields, know that if you take two particles and you shoot them at the speed of light in opposite directions of the universe, and you change the spin on one of the particles, the other particle matches it, and does the same thing. Like, how is that possible? But another example of how, everything is connected.
Yeah. So, I'm glad you talked about intention, because I think that's really important. So just to give you a little background on me. So I grew up, I'm animist, been animist since birth. And so the whole idea of spirit contact, that's just something I grew up with. It wasn't like anything weird. It's, somebody has a spirit story. It's just like, okay,
Right.
So given that, I have done paranormal investigations with teams and equipment and all of this stuff, and there's all kinds of activity. So I live in Richmond, Virginia, which has got tons of active spaces all over the place. And people's getting activity, and you can see them and it's captured. And then as soon as I get there, it stops. Now I'm there because I want to see it. I believe in it, but it never happens around me. Any idea what's going on there?
Well, all these things that are non-physical things, they're spontaneous in nature, which makes it very difficult to study in a laboratory setting or in a clinical atmosphere. And again, in science, when we observe something, it collapses, where it was in a wave state, once we observe it, it changes, its state. So sometimes these things happen. I saw that when I mentioned electronic voice phenomena, studying this, you know exactly what that is. And, it's strange because, as you know, when these, electronic voice phenomena, messages are captured, you can never ever hear them live as they're being recorded.
Right.
You only hear them on playback. It's the same kind of principle, I don't know the true answer to that. And it's frustrating to a lot of people, especially to scientists and researchers, that they try to study these things, using scientific protocol, and it doesn't always work, so.
Right. Yeah.
And some of us happen to be receptors for these things. I mean, I have a friend that's she also happens to be a medium, and she's been experimenting with electronic voice phenomena for 15 years. And she, I know people that try for years and never get anything, virtually every time she turns on the recorder, she gets something,
Right. And, I've never been. Yeah, you always get stuff. I've never been in an investigation where we never got it. Well, no, I take that back. So, so I was in a seance at a haunted house. You could feel it was just it was a Civil War place that had been used as a hospital. Energy was really dark and heavy. I'll call it heavy, not dark. When we came in, it's an old house. It's not used. It's not in consistent use. And, sometimes there's funky smells in there. And I thought it had a plumbing problem when I came in. But then the next day, it was upstairs. And the next day I went back and the smell was somewhere else. I'm like, okay, that's not a plumbing problem. That's something else. So there's lots and lots of energy, lots of stuff there. And we had a seance there and got nothing, not anything, not on any recorder, not on anything. Any ideas what's going on there?
No, people have been experimenting, with physical mediumship. Mental mediumship is what everybody's familiar with. It's a telepathic process. The medium is communicating with the discarnate entity. It's still telepathy. It's the person, one of the parties involved doesn't have a body, but they still have consciousness. So people, I know people that have had seances and physical mediumship. There's a lot of observable physical phenomena that appear, levitations, apports, things of all sorts of.
You've seen this?
What was it?
You've seen this?
I've been, I was curious about it, because I've read so much of the literature, and then there were some extraordinary physical mediums back 100 years ago. Not so much today. There are some. So my wife and I traveled, to see, a physical medium. He's from Germany. Cause I was just curious about the process. And the problem is that most of the physical mediums insist that the seance be conducted in darkness. So there's no way for you to evaluate whether what you're experiencing is extraordinary and real or it's a fraud. Yeah. And you can't tell. In the seance that, physical, mediumship seance that I sat in, they have, they call it a trumpet. It's sort of a cylinder that's made out of cardboard. So that's what they used back in the day. I got wrapped in my head in my body with that 15 times during the seance. And I saw, various, different lights, saw some ectoplasm, which is another story.
Oh, wow.
But the problem is I could not make any independent, unbiased judgment because I couldn't see anything. So either it's amazing and evidential and extraordinary, or it's a fraud, and I can't say one way or another. In mental mediumship, we have ways of testing whether or not the evidence is real or not. I mean, we developed in 2005 a medium certification program. A lot of scientists helped me devise it, and I kind of enhanced it and added to it over the years. But we put mediums in a situation under controlled conditions, and I train sitters and I teach them how to score evidence. And based upon 5 readings that they do, we can determine the percentage of accuracy that they have. So, and it's proved out to be, successful over the years. So, those things, there are certain things that you can measure, and, certain things that you can't. You can't force these things to happen, as you see. I mean, you can't will them to happen. As a matter of fact, the evidence seems to show that they happen more often when you can set your intention and then let your intention go, like don't focus on it and try to force it to happen. That inhibits the process. But if you just put the thought out there into the universe, somehow that seems to help.
How about in reverse? Let's say that I live in an active house and I don't want any contact. Can I do that?
Sure. I mean, it's something that I ask, people often ask mediums, and I get asked that question too, if mediums can turn off, in other words, so they're not open and they're not receptive to information. And a lot of them will say, yeah, they either ask their guides or they, set their intention for no information to come through. However, I've been in social situations with these same mediums that tell me that, and we're having dinner or something and we're having a drink, and then all of a sudden I see that look in their eyes and information starts pouring through, and so I don't know that they truly can turn it off. It is a problem. I mean, because just imagine if you're hearing voices and seeing spirit and getting all sorts of communications, that could drastically affect how you live your daily life. I mean, as a matter of fact, we're presently consulting in a study that's being done at the Yale School of Medicine. And what they're doing is they want to study mediums and people who are able to get communications and hear voices. And they're trying to identify how such people turn off communication, because they think they'll be able to help schizophrenics, who have, mental illness, and develop some sort of a treatment protocol based upon what they learn. It's interesting.
So what I do for a living, I'm a trauma therapist.
Okay.
And I get a ton of people, a surprising number of people. I don't know why they come to me, but they do. And they tell me these stories because they don't know, what am I hearing? Is this real? Am I crazy? Or, what are these voices? Is there a way to tell the difference between a discarnate voice, a spirit that's talking to you, and something else, something that's a mental health issue?
Yeah, it could be a fine line. I have to tell you that there's so many. There's tens of thousands of people every year that are misdiagnosed, and put on.
Right, for sure, yes.
Medications, because it's just a normal sense, like us speaking or hearing or smelling. It's another sense, and their mental health professional was misdiagnosing it and dismissing it and say, oh, they must be crazy. They must have a mental illness, and the treatment when they're not. Right. I think that when people start sharing these experiences that they have, and this becomes more widely accepted, I think people will be able to live more meaningful lives, instead of shutting it down. Now, there are some mental health professionals that embrace this, instead of trying to counsel their patients in ways that they can separate from their loved one that's passed. They teach the opposite. Continue a relationship, just in a different way, and I think that's healthy. Well, we get calls from parents whose children are seeing deceased relatives, or they're hearing things and they're worried, but it's common, it's more common than anyone would think. And, we tell them of course, some people do have mental illnesses, and for that they need to seek professional guidance. But for the rest of them, embrace it, engage your child in conversations. These things tend to, with children, a lot of times it kind of dissipates as they get older, and that may have something to do with, society and cultural norms and education or religion and so forth. And so, well, we shouldn't talk about that. It gets weaned out of. I think that our ancestors, there were these ages of mysticism that lasted for, tens of thousands of years, and people didn't think of this as paranormal. It was just part of who we were.
Just normal.
Yeah, it was just normal.
Yeah.
And you can make the argument that the founders of most of today's organized religions came out of those ages of mysticism. So it was like pure communication without the dogma. It's sort of got went off kilter, in the ages. But I think it's something that is inherent to us all, and you don't have to be a medium. You can just be a personal communicator.
Right.
And remain open,
Yeah, I agree. I'm so glad that people are starting to say that. Anytime I have somebody tell me a story, like, I've never told anybody this before, I'm like, why aren't you telling people? Talk about it. I see that all the time. I've never told anybody. If we all talked about it, it would just be normal.
You're right. We used to host all these afterlife, we call them afterlife discussion groups across the country. And they were simply small, safe groups, maybe 10 or 20 people, simply for the purpose of sharing and discussing experiences and learning, about the different types of evidence and so forth. And we'd see it all the time. People would come usually in various stages of grief, and they would sit there in the meeting and they wouldn't open their mouths. They just listen. And they'd come to the second meeting. We didn't hold them that often, and then they wouldn't say a word. And then the third meeting, all of a sudden they would start telling experiences and stories, and you just want to shake them and say, why didn't you tell us this before?
Right.
Because they had to determine if we were safe, and that, it's a shame, it's like, because people are judged and labeled, when they talk about these things, I can recall a time, not long, about 2 years after my daughter passed, I went to a medical doctor who was a friend of mine. I don't remember why I went there. It was for something. And he greeted me and he asked me what I was doing. And I said, you really want to know? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, I'm studying survival of consciousness. So he looked at me and he said, okay. And we go talk some more. We're talking about 20 minutes. And he says to me, can I ask you something? He says, what's survival of consciousness? So I start telling him about all this stuff that we're talking about now. And eventually he got this real serious look on his face. And he said, I have to tell you something. He said, my father died 8 years ago. And he said, I had a lot of patients in the hospital that were critical, and I needed to call my answering service and check on them because I couldn't make rounds. And he called the answering service and he said, oh, doctor, your father called. And he said, my father died at 9 o'clock this morning. And they said, oh, I'm so sorry, doctor. We must have gotten the message wrong. It must have been you must have said your father-in-law. He said, my father-in-law died 15 years ago. He said, what time did the call come in? And they said 9:15. He says, well, read me back the message. And the message was, hi, it's me. I'm okay. So here's this medical doctor that kept for 8 years, didn't tell a soul. He wouldn't tell his wife. He wouldn't tell his children. He wouldn't tell his colleagues. He wouldn't tell anybody. But after he heard the stuff that was coming out of my mouth, he knew I wasn't going to judge him. So I presented that environment and he told it. But, and the reason I like to tell that story is because it just illustrates how unfortunate it is that we feel that we have to suppress that instead of telling people,
Yeah, I think especially when somebody passes, because I've been to, I don't know what you call these. They usually have them at comedy clubs, but it's a medium. It's like a gallery thing where there's a bunch of people, and they'll just come to you and do messages. And people come there almost always because somebody has died, and they just want to know they're okay, and they're just crying, and there's such a relief, I think, to hear something from them.
Yeah, mediumship can be very transformative, in grief. But on the other hand, they could do a lot of damage, because, and I cover this extensively in the medium explosion because, people that are, as you mentioned, some of them are in horrible grief. It's very raw, and they desperately want to hear from their loved one, and they'll make anything fit. They'll hear something different than what the mediums are saying. And sometimes mediums use various techniques like cold reading techniques, where they'll size you up based upon your appearance and your age and your ethnicity. And, they'll say general statements, and, all to fool you into believing that its communication is really taking place when it's not. On the other hand, there are some mediums that are out there, and especially the ones we've certified. A lot of them have gone on to fame and fortune, but they are very, very consistent, and they don't resort to any tactics. Today we live in this age of Google. With a click of a mouse, I could find out half your life story. So mediums can find out all. 100 years ago that didn't exist. But today. Mm-hmm. It's a real problem. We try to train people what to say, how to react, not to divulge information. Don't feed the medium, let them tell you, because it's much more powerful that way, Mm-hmm. So if I give you a message, and I say that, I have your grandmother here and she's telling me that she loves you. Okay, well, that's so general, and it's a message. Right. How many grandmothers don't love their grandchildren, So, but if I came to you and I said, "Oh, listen, I have your grandmother here, Rebecca, and your grandmother's name was Rebecca," that's more evidential, And, right. And we score these things. We score evidential information higher than just general stuff,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I'm saying yes, believe, but there are crackpots out there who are just totally unscrupulous. And I do think, you can get taken advantage of if you really want to see it and really want to believe it.
Yeah. Years ago, I had a next door neighbor and unfortunately her husband passed in an accident at work. And, she knew what we did, so she asked if she told us of two experiences. One, she went to a lot of people misuse the term psychic for medium. It's different, mm-hmm. But she went to a psychic, and the psychic told her that she was cursed. And before she knew it, she bought curse removing candles for the tune of $5,000.
Oh my God.
Could you imagine that? And this was an intelligent professional woman, but it just shows that she was in such grief that she was very vulnerable,
Yeah.
So, and she also told me that she had an incredible reading with a medium and she recorded it, and she asked me to listen to the recording so I can evaluate it. And I did. And she was shocked because most of what she thought she heard when we played the tape wasn't actually said, so you kind of just making things. So it's something it can be treacherous, but, we hold these, grief retreats, one of which was depicted in the Surviving Death series, on Netflix. And it's just, sometimes it's amazing. You see people arrive on Friday and they're in such sadness they can't even speak, let alone smile. And then Sunday night when they leave, they're hugging and they're kissing and they're talking and there are smiles, and what that about says it all. It's terrific.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever get anything that's just like hilarious happen, either as you're investigating or or just some funny ghost stories?
Well, most of the stuff, happens. The mediums reported a lot of stuff. I put a bunch of that stuff in my book, but yeah, sometimes they're even shocked, at the information that it is funny. Some of which I put some X-rated ones in the book. I can't even repeat them here, but yeah, sometimes because it's a question. That question I posed to mediums. I said, tell me something, hilarious or extraordinary, and they all have different stories of things happen. There are also things that are shocking. There's one story I have in the book of a medium that's certified by us. And she was doing, this is not a funny thing. It's just an example of how mediums, how people in spirit keep tabs on what's happening in our real lives. She was doing a reading, the medium, for a woman in her home, in the medium's home. And she was bringing through the woman's deceased mom. And she was bringing forth all this, specific evidence. So, the woman knew that the connection was made. And all of a sudden the medium said, wait, your mom is showing me 1 shot fired, 2 shots fired, 1 dead, and the woman is sitting there saying, oh my God, what are you medium? You must be nuts. My mother would never say anything like that. Then she said, 3 shots fired, 4 shots fired. And she goes, 4 shots, 3 people dead. Within 20 seconds after she said that, the 2 of them, the medium and the sitter, heard sirens outside the medium's house.
Oh, wow.
It turns out one of the medium's neighbors, there was an estranged family, and the estranged husband came home, broke into the house,
oh gosh,
killed 4 shots fired and 3 people were killed. So it's a striking example of, this was information given by somebody in spirit about something that was happening in real time in the physical world. Now, where they are, I don't think there's such a thing as real time. I think past, present, and future is all, kind of happening at the same time. But I think that people in spirit do keep tabs on what's happening here. It doesn't mean that they're watching you 24 hours a day, but kind of, we're beings of thought. They remain beings of thought, and there's still communication, that takes place. The other day, the same medium that I was talking about that does EVP, my wife passed away in September, and sometimes I talk out loud to her, just about menial things. So the other day, I was washing the dishes in the sink, and I said to my wife, I said, I don't care what you say, this sink is poorly designed because water splashes all over the place. Well, next thing you know, I get an email from my friend Janet, who says that she was doing a meditation, doing her own a personal meditation, not for the purposes of connecting with spirit. But she said, my wife, Phran, just appeared in a meditation and said, mention the kitchen sink to Bob. And I had just said that, so it was, it's something trivial and meaningless, but it was meaningful to me because I had just put that out there, and now I'm getting it back, so.
So do you have any stories of, like psychic detective stuff? Like, when I was in this gallery, reading, there was at least one person in the audience who had somebody murdered, and they were hoping to get a whodunit kind of thing. Do you have any stories like that?
Not specifically. I know that there's a book called Afterlife Encounters by Diane Archangel, and she has a very compelling story in there along those lines where a woman's son was murdered, and they could not find, the police were at a dead end. They had no clues. They couldn't find the murderer. And through a medium, a message was relayed to her that where the accident site was. And they said, you need to go to the accident site, because there's blood in the snow, but you need to go right away because the temperatures were rising and you'd lose the evidence. And the woman then had a conundrum. What do? Do I call the detective and tell him that a medium told me this? You know, they might laugh at me. So instead she said, I had an anonymous tip. And the detective accompanied her, and they went to the site that was described. And sure enough, there they found, the blood in the snow, and they were able to test it, and they solved the case. So, I know that, most of the mediums that we work with, I mean, don't do it on a regular basis, but some of them get called upon, by, law enforcement, to help with cases, some of it is just purely psychic information, mind to mind communication among living entities. And some, like the story I just mentioned, comes from, somebody, in spirit. So sometimes they're using their psychic abilities. Sometimes they're using the mediumistic abilities, but, those things happen all the time. And even without mediums, sometimes people have these precognitive dreams, or this information that comes to them in a dream, and they wake up and turns out to be true. I mean, how many people, decided not to go to work the day of the 9/11 because it just didn't feel right, So, I mean, you hear these stories through the ages of just getting this, we call them gut feelings, but, who knows where they emanate from, but we're antenna for information.
Mm-hmm. You research near-death experiences too, right?
Yeah, we don't perform the research ourselves, but we work with scientists that, because we educate the public about the evidence that they produce. I think that near-death experiences are very, very compelling, maybe the best form of evidence of life after death, because here you have people that they meet every definition of death. They have no brain waves, they have no respiration, they have no heartbeat. They have no reflexes. They are dead, and medicine says they're dead, and yet, we have these great resuscitative techniques now, and a lot of people do get brought back, and they come back with various stories of information that they couldn't possibly have known. They report things like floating above their bodies and seeing what was going on and describing everything that was going on in the waiting room, in the operating room, or being at a totally different location, and meeting deceased loved ones, and being imbued with all of this information, and some return with enhanced psychic ability on their own. Somehow it jolts the system. The interesting thing is that almost invariably nobody wants to come back. I mean, they're pissed off when they come back, put back into that body, because where they were, most of the time, was beautiful, and vibrant colors, and music and clarity of thinking. And, sometimes the skeptics will say, well, this is just the result of, oxygen deprivation, but, people that have oxygen deprivation, they don't have clear and lucid thinking. They're thrashing about, they have all for these fragmented, crazy kind of thoughts. But what are people without a working brain? These people describe these, realer than real, these clear thinking, lucid, conversations, which should not be possible, if it was just a result of, oxygen deprivation. So, I think that's a very compelling form of evidence.
Now, you said most of the time people report going to this heavenly place. Do you have stories of when they didn't go to, meaning a dark place?
Yeah, about 10% of it, 90%, I would say, have these positive experiences, and about 10% don't, and a lot of it, don't forget, it's filtered by our own upbringing and culture and religion and all these other factors, so, and that's why experiences vary. So somebody in our culture might be religious, so they interpret seeing this divine entity, and they'll say that they saw Jesus, and somebody in another country might say that they saw, Muhammad, and somebody might say, well, I saw Buddha, So I think they're all seeing the same thing, but they're interpreting these things in their own frame of reference. So similarly, if you were very religious and you were taught your whole life that there was a heaven and a hell, and that you were going to go to one place or another, you might interpret an experience that you had as hellish, So I don't know. I don't personally believe that there's a delineation of places. I think that we go based upon our own self-judgment. Near-death experiences report having a life review where their entire life is flashed before them like a quick movie reel. And during that review, they get to experience all of the harm and the negative energy and that they inflicted upon others, and they feel that pain, and they also feel the exhilaration, all the joy and out of love and compassion that they brought upon others. So people judge themselves, and that's sort of where we wind up, maybe with like-minded people. But the consensus is that even if you were a horrible, disgusting, evil person in the physical life, that eventually you have a totally different perspective in your new surroundings, and you have assistance, and eventually you will move, closer to whatever you want to call it, advancement or enlightened. And some people are uncomfortable with that because they want justice. They want, somebody that was a murderer to be confined to a hellish existence for the rest of eternity. I don't think that's the way it works. I
agree. So I don't know. I think that the best thing to do with that is to kind of get over it. Anyway.
Yeah, let it go. Right.
Yeah. So, I know that a lot of paranormal investigations take place at night, and so being that I've done this, and the most activity that we get tends to be, oddly enough, at what we call the witching hour. Do you find that to be true too? Like they show up more at night, or that a certain time of day or night is more active than others?
Well, there's some truth to that, because we have always found that the hours where most people report, communications and encounters and things seems to be something around that 3 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the morning kind of a thing, and from personal experience and what people report. I don't know why. As far as at night, like going out, and doing investigations at night versus the day, I don't think it really matters, when it comes to paranormal phenomena. I never quite got why people like to do investigations in cemeteries. That they're not there, right. They're entities, their body that they discarded is there, but who they are is somewhere entirely different, So over the years, it's been my daughter passed in 2002. I've been to the cemetery twice, because I just don't think of her as being there. She's elsewhere, So I don't know now. Some people might argue yes, but some people after they pass still have physical attachments, and that may be true. Somebody that was a musician, might want to try to experience more music, or somebody that loved to eat might want to, or have another drink or be close to the physical world and have attachments to that. And then eventually, release. I'm open to that, but what's interesting is that along those lines, it wasn't addressing the question you answered, but I find that, most people, it really doesn't matter, the surroundings that they're in, or the time. After death communications take place all the time, 24 hours a day. It's just that I mentioned that 3 o'clock hour because there seems to be a higher percentage of people that have these experiences just then. I don't know why.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about healing the dead? Do you feel like they need any healing, or can that be done?
I don't know. I don't know that we would do any healing from our end. I think that there are people on the other side that help. I think that when people are trying to communicate from the other side, they have mediums on their side too to help get messages, to us. But there's nothing wrong with expressing. The way I look at it is emotion is a conduit. So sometimes I'll say to myself, well, would my loved one in spirit, can they feel my sadness? And if they feel my sadness, is that holding them back? Is they, in a sense that am I causing them any I was going to say discomfort. It's a bad term, but am I affecting them negatively by them having to feel my pain, and I kind of use that as a coping mechanism to snap out of it, On the other hand, if I set my intention or if they feel the love that I have for them, maybe that uplifts them, in a certain way. So I think that emotions, do play a role in everything that we do. Even the researchers that study psychic phenomena, when there's a strong emotions or conduits for telepathic communication, and various other phenomena. So, and it could be, that's why mediums work, is that almost always there's a love bond between the sitter and the person in spirit. So they might use that emotion of love to help them, use it as a conduit to get information through. Information doesn't come, emotion doesn't come, communication doesn't come through as often with people that don't know each other or, don't have strong feelings about one another.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. The time has just flown by. Thank you so much for the chat.
You're welcome.
Can you tell our listeners more about your foundation, your book, and podcast, anything you want to share about how to get in touch with you?
Yeah, the foundation is Forever, spelled out words, foreverfamilyfoundation.org. On the website that we have, you can join as a member. It's free. And we have a radio show every week, and we have webinars, and we have retreats, and we have all sorts of different things. We have recommended reading section. We have videos, so it's a good resource for learning about this stuff. My book is called The Medium Explosion. It's available, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and so forth. And that's kind of a guidebook to anybody that was ever thinking about going to a medium or has gone to a medium, or just simply curious about the evidence, for life after death. Anybody, all the contact information is on our website.
Okay. And is the certified medium stuff also on that website? Yeah,
there's a section on mediumship and certified mediums, and anybody interested in applying, there's instructions on how to do that.
Oh, cool. Yeah. All right.
And if anybody gets a chance, they could watch Surviving Death on Netflix. Our foundation is featured in episode 4.
Awesome. Cool.
Okay.
Well, that's our show for this week, and you can find us on YouTube, Facebook, MeWe, and Twitter. Send us your questions and comments. We'd love hearing from you. Thank you all for joining us for this edition of Pan Society Radio. My thanks to the elements, ancestors, and our guest, of course. So grateful for the listeners, too, and I'll see you all next week.